Welcome, everyone, to the Girlfriend Book Club's monthly discussion. I'm Shelley Emling, the editor of the Girlfriend newsletter. I'm also the moderator of the Girlfriend Book Club. And this month, the more than 100,000 members of the Girlfriend Book Club chose the Lion Women of Tehran as our January book club pick. And I'm thrilled that you did. I say that fairly often, but I really mean I love this book so much. It stuck with me for a long time after I finished reading it last week. And so we're so thrilled to be joined by best-selling author Marjan Kamali this evening, who's also the author of The Stationery Shop. So welcome, Marjan.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. First of all, I just have to ask, and I know you've answered this question countless times, but what was the inspiration behind this book? I read that it was based on a real friendship that you had. Can you just tell the audience a little bit about what inspired you to write the book?
Yes, I'll never tire of saying what inspired it because it still gives me goosebumps. After The Stationery Shop, which you mentioned, I started writing a different book, and I was more than 100 pages in. It was about 4 suburban moms who were obsessed with their firstborns getting into good colleges. It was slowly becoming a murder mystery. But anyway, then the pandemic began, and I was scrolling Instagram. And on Instagram, I have a friend who is my friend from when I was a child in Iran. And we were best friends, and we did everything together. And we were, at that time, I think convinced that our friendship would last our whole lives. We'd share our dreams about who we'd grow up to be. But now during the pandemic, decades later, here I was, a writer telling stories in the US, and there she was. She works at a human rights organization in Iran. But what struck me was the visceral sense I had just seeing her face again. It was as though I could feel in my body, in my limbs, in my veins, our friendship. And I just thought again about how these friendships we make when we're little, they truly shape who we become, and their influence lasts even if the friendship doesn't. So I knew I really wanted to write the story of a broken friendship, and I put aside that other book I'd started, and I wrote The Lion Women of Tehran.
So had you not spoken to her or heard from her in all those years leading up to the pandemic?
We had become friends on Instagram before the pandemic.
Okay.
And so we had been connected, but sometimes on social media you forget who's who and who you have and who you don't. So that was the time when I sort of started to delve deep into what was going on, but we had become friends before that.
Wow. So I don't want you to reveal anything you don't want to reveal, but I know that your family fled Iran and came to New York after the revolution. I think you lived in Tehran. I'm just reading my notes, between the ages of 2 and 5 and 9 and 10 and a half.
Yes.
What do you remember about that time? Do you remember living there in Iran during that time?
I do. I remember both times. Between 2 and 5, I remember mostly, starting kindergarten, preschool, and the latter part of that. But it was before the revolution when I lived there between 2 and 5, and it was a very different country. When we went back, that second segment, when I lived there between ages 9 to 10 and a half, almost 11, it was after the revolution, and it was during the war. So the war began while we lived there. And I spent many times in the basement as the air raid sirens went off. I watched the laws change in real time. So when we re-entered Iran, women still had freedom of dress. They could dress as they chose. All those laws, the laws changed while we were there. And I remember it quite well, remarkably well, because it was a pivotal time in my life. So many changes, and you don't forget war. Right. So those details of that time there are sort of always with me.
So did you meet your friend when you were there when you were younger, or when you were there when you were 9, 10 years old?
The second time.
The second
9 to 10. Yeah. We met in 4th grade.
In 4th grade. Okay. So you had a year or two together, I guess. right?
Yeah, we had about a year and a half together. Yeah.
Together. But it must have that made a big impact on you, that
Oh,
friendship.
huge impact, huge impact. And you can imagine I was kind of new to the country because I'd lived overseas and I'd gone back. And so I really wanted a friend. I desperately wanted a friend just to help anchor me and
Right.
make me feel less lonely. So yeah, she made a huge difference in my childhood.
Wow. So just as an aside, I didn't realize that you had some of the Persian recipes from the book on your website until somebody pointed it out to me earlier today. Is there a Persian recipe that is your favorite that you like to make or that you could recommend that we should try? Or I'm just curious.
Yeah, so I get asked about the recipe so much. So my publisher created a recipe booklet over the summer when I was on book tour after the book came out. We would give those out at independent bookshops, and boy, they were going like hotcakes. So we eventually put up the PDF on my website. We had to narrow it down to 4 recipes. And I will say it's so hard to pick a fave because I love so many of them.
Yeah.
But I will say one of them, I literally made it last night, actually,
Oh,
for my son's birthday. It's on my website. It's part of the PDF. It's the walnut and pomegranate molasses and chicken stew,
yeah.
and it's very good for fall and winter. And I love it. And in The Lion Women of Tehran, Homa loves it. It's her
Yes.
favorite. And so many things, kind of important plot points, hinge around uh,
Yeah.
that dish.
So I always have to ask authors, was there a particular character or scene or chapter that was more challenging for you to write than the others?
Yes. Um, Without giving spoilers, there is a chapter that appears towards the end of the book that originally wasn't a chapter, it was 2 paragraphs. And when the manuscript went to my editor, she said, "You need to lengthen this and draw it out." I will say, I don't think this is a spoiler. It's a fire and a
Mhm,
person caught in one, and
mhm.
that's hard to write.
Right.
And I I thought to myself, "Oh my goodness, how do I do this? How do I do this?" And that was really rough to write. But I did what I always do when I have a difficult scene to write, which is I turned off the computer and I took out my notebook and my pen and
Mhm.
kind of just sat on the floor. And I find for emotional scenes, tough scenes, most scenes, writing longhand is a very good way to do it.
Well, I was gonna ask you about your writing process. I mean, did you how long did it take you to write this book?
It took me 2.5 years to write the first draft. There were many stops and starts, and the story kept developing.
Yeah.
And then it took me an additional year to revise. So I would say 3.5 to 4 years, which is exactly how long it took me to write the stationery shop as well. Um, and my writing process is I love to write longhand. So
Hmm.
no wonder I wrote a book called The Stationery Shop because I do love stationery and I have more notebooks than should be legal. And I love pens and, fountain pens and ink bottles. And I don't plot too much ahead of time for the first draft. A lot of the first draft is just sort of discovering the story, excavating what's what, and coming up with that lump of clay.
Yeah.
And then for the ensuing drafts plural, then I'm, very meticulous about plotting once I sort of have the clay.
So I know that you've lived in many, many cities and many countries. I just wondered if you could tell the audience a little bit about your development as a writer. I mean, did you always know that you wanted to be a writer?
I always read. So from the time I could read, I became what we used to call a bookworm. And, I always had my head in a book and I was very passionate about reading. And I did write, I always wrote, but I didn't know it was a vocation that was possible until I was in high school. And when I was in high school, my English teacher encouraged me to pursue writing. And I said, oh, well, no, we don't do that, because I'm a child of immigrants. And the
Mhm.
expectation, regardless of your ethnicity, from many immigrants is to go into the professions, for the first generation, to become a doctor, lawyer, engineer. And in college, then I had a wonderful English professor who really, really encouraged me to become a writer. And I think that's why I'm a writer, because he really believed in me.
Wow. I just had to ask you, the phrase "lion women," is that where is that from? What does that mean to you?
So it's a real phrase. So lion women is translated literally from the Persian. So, we say shir zan in Persian. Shir means lion, zan means women. And it's a phrase I heard when I was growing up. And it basically is a label for women who are very strong and don't take any nonsense, and who are opinionated and vocal and resilient. And it just meant so much to know that this term existed. The fact that there was a name
Right.
for women like this growing up in a patriarchy was just really empowering. So that's where the phrase comes from.
So was it easier or harder to write about Ellie or Homa? I would love to know.
Mm.
Or the same.
Well, Ellie, of the two friends, Ellie, I would say, has more insecurities, and she's
Mm,
more flawed. Um, Homa is one of those rare people who is just supremely authentic and idealistic, almost to a fault. Homa was easier to write, and I'll
oh,
tell you, yeah, because
I would
she
have thought the opposite, but okay. Yeah.
oh, really?
Yeah.
No, because Homa wrote herself. She was so powerful, even, on the page. Once I started to write her voice, she took over. And I was really worried writing from her point of view, because I wasn't sure how that would go. I'd written Ellie's point of view for the most part,
Mhm.
for a good chunk of the book. But Homa took over, and as she would, she just
Yeah.
she just drove the story herself.
So I have some questions from the Girlfriend Book Club members themselves because I asked them, "What do you want me to ask you?"
Yes.
And a lot of them said Ellie's mother believes in the evil eye.
Mm.
Were you believed to? Were you taught to believe this as you were growing up? Was this a superstition? I think it's a superstition in a lot of countries. I've heard you say it's not just Iran, but
So
uh,
many cultures. Yes, because I get notes from people. I know it's prevalent, not just Turkey, Greece, but India. It's in the Jewish culture, Italian. So many cultures believe in this concept of the evil eye, that basically means if you're perceived as too competent, too successful, too happy, too beautiful,
yeah,
someone's going to jinx you.
they're
They're
going to
going
be
to sort
jealous.
of, yes, yes. And I did grow up with this superstition. It wasn't necessarily my mother who imparted it, it was just in the air. It's part of the culture.
Right.
I really envy, and again, it's weird to say envy because it's about envy, but I envy people who didn't grow up with it, because I think it's liberating if you didn't. But
Hmm.
if you did, you're always just kind of at the back of your mind thinking about it.
So I just wondered if you keep up now with, I guess your friend is back in, is your friend in Iran still? Is okay.
Mhm.
And I'm curious, did she read the manuscript? Did she respond to the book?
I don't know, because so in Iran, a lot of social media is not allowed, but
Right.
Instagram is.
Huh.
And yeah, so I know I can kind of keep up with her. Again, I haven't, I don't know why I'm saying again. People ask me a lot, so I'm saying again about whether she's read it. I don't know. I
Right.
haven't told her directly, but if you follow me on Instagram, I've talked about Lion Women. I've talked about the inspiration. So I wonder if she knows. And one of these days I'm going to pluck up my courage and just directly tell her. I'm almost like afraid to rock the boat, but I
Mhm.
will. one
When's the
day.
last time you saw her? When you were 10 years old?
Yes. The last time I saw her in person was when I was 10. And then
Wow.
I came to New York. She stayed in Iran. And in the beginning, we wrote letters to each other, on those airmail
Yeah.
trifold aerograms.
Right.
Um, I love that I'm talking to AARP members because they'll know what that
Yeah,
is.
we know.
Sometimes when I tell, my students, they're like, "What?" I'm like, um, but yeah, so we did write letters. I still have her letters for a while, and then we just kind of lost touch.
Yeah. So somebody else wanted me to ask you, well, somebody said, I attended Queens College in New York City. I went there for undergrad and graduate degrees. Did you know real people who went to Queens College? Was there a reason you plucked that out somehow?
Oh, I love that. I didn't know anyone personally. I did live in Queens.
Mm,
So once we moved to New York, I lived in Queens. I picked Queens College for Bahar, who we won't get into everything about who she is, but I picked that for her because I wanted it to be a good college that, she would want to attend and that would keep her in the US. And I just felt, I don't know,
yeah,
every decision a writer makes is for a multitude of reasons.
right.
Nothing is just willy nilly.
Was Bahar based on anybody that you know?
No, but I was very much able to inhabit her soul, especially because some of the scenes for Bahar take place in the early 1980s
Yeah.
in New York City. And I lived in New York City in the early 1980s. Well, that's when we moved. And there was something very, very specific and sensory about New York in those days that I still retain. So it was a lot of fun writing the Bahar scenes because I could just inhabit that New York again.
Yeah. And so finally, just from the audience, well, I said this, many women, including myself, said that your book was so beautiful, they had to sit with it for a bit, and it took days for them to be able to pick up another book and start reading something new.
Mm.
I'm just wondering if you've heard that a lot from women, and have you ever felt that way about a book that you've read? And I felt that way too. I did.
Oh,
I finished it last week, and I really couldn't read. I didn't want to read anything else. I just had to sit with it for a while.
I'm honored. I'm honored to hear that. I have felt that way about books I've read. There are certain books I read when after I finish, I just need to be for a while. And I certainly don't want to start a new book for some days because I need to be with the characters and digest everything, absorb everything. And I'm so deep in that world. So it certainly happened to me as a reader. I'm deeply honored that it happens for readers with my book. I have heard that a lot. I think what happens is that Ellie and Homa feel to readers like people that they grow to really know
Mhm.
and to identify with in many ways. And because the backdrop of the book is the women's rights movement in Iran, I feel there's there's just so many parallels and similarities despite our countries being very different in just a women's journey. There's so many things that I think people can relate to.
So I mentioned before that you have lived in a lot of different countries, and I can't even, there's a laundry list of them. Where do you feel at home most? I think you live in the Boston area now. Is
I
that
do. I live in the Boston area. It's the longest I've lived anywhere. I feel at home here. Um, it's such a hard question to answer. I feel like I need therapy to answer it, to be completely honest with you.
yeah.
Um, I've lived in 7 countries and I've
So
lived in 5 continents. So I used to think it made it seem like, nowhere was really home. But to be honest, it also feels like everywhere is home. The places that I've lived in are all a part of me.
yeah.
They're all a part of me.
So do you keep up with what's going on in Iran now? And are you, when's the last time, was it when you were 10? Was that the last time you were there? I mean, have you traveled back, or I'm just curious how much you keep up with what's happening now.
I try to keep up. It's tough because so much of the news is heartbreaking.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's hopeful, but I left when I was 10 and I didn't go back again until I was 25.
Oh, you went
Um,
back at 25. I didn't know that. Okay.
I did, yeah. So my first novel, Together Tea, of all my books, I would say it's the most semi-autobiographical. The
Mhm.
character leaves when she's 10, goes back when she's 25. And then I went back one other time in my 20s and twice in my 30s, and I haven't been back. I haven't been back since 2011. So I do keep up with the news, and so many of your members might remember the Women Life Freedom movement that happened in the fall of 2022. It makes a showing in the book itself.
Right.
Um, and yeah, there's just this constant cycle of protests, and sometimes from afar, it can feel like something's about to break through, and then they're quashed, and then it's heartbreaking. So the cycle so far continues, but we'll see what happens.
But the research you did for the book with the chanting in the streets and all that, you must have had to do a lot of research.
I did. I did a ton of research. There's so much, you can find out just by reading nonfiction books, newspaper accounts. I mean, the New York Times has the actual articles from the Women's March that happened in Tehran in 1979 in March. So there's pictures you can find, all of that. But I had the privilege of being able to interview elders in my family who had lived in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s and seen well, not human, I have to be particular, women's rights expand
Mhm.
at that time in those decades, and then saw it all sort of taken away. So I was able to interview people and really get a lot of wonderful and important information from them.
So everybody wants to know, what are you working on now?
Oh, yes, that is the question. The next book, currently called Novel 4, lovely title, and
Number 4.
Novel 4 is a lovely title. Shelley, I'm at my desk where I write, so I can show you. Let me tell the Girlfriend Book Club. Here's the notebook. It's
Wow.
beautifully blank at the moment, and it shall be filled. Um, I'm working on it.
Good.
I was on this like rollicking 6-month book tour, and it sort of keeps going. But the time is now here to really
Start.
dig deep. Yeah,
So any chance of this being made into a film?
there is a chance. I don't want to sound like Jim Carrey and Dumb and Dumber. So you're saying there's a chance. There is a chance. And people are talking, but you know how it is. We can't talk about anything that's
No,
got
I know.
anything
And
to do with Hollywood.
it's a long process too, I know that.
Yes,
But I
yes.
would think if any book was ripe for a movie, it would be this one.
Oh,
So
well, thank you, thank you.
so can I just ask what, authors inspire you, or has there been a book you could recommend to us that we should read that has been a favorite of yours from the past year or 2?
Well, the authors I read when I was a child were surprisingly the British classics, because those were the paperbacks my mom had. So I was reading a lot of Jane Austen and Charles Dickens and the Bronte sisters. All of those books kind of shaped me at a young age. She didn't have YA. We didn't know what that was, or middle grade. So I was reading the adult books. But later, Gabrielle Garcia Marquez and Toni Morrison really influenced me when I was a teenager. Author in the past couple years, a book I've loved is Ask Again Yes by Mary Beth Keane. I just love that book. It came out, I suppose, maybe 5 years ago, so it's not as recent. But
But it's called Ask Again, Yes?
yes, Ask Again, comma, yes.
Okay.
And it's just beautifully written and so well done. I love it. I'm currently also reading Emma Straub's latest. Um, This Time Tomorrow, I think it's called.
Good.
Yes. Yeah.
So what would you hope people take away from the Lion Women of Tehran?
I would hope that they take away a sense of healing. I really hope so because I tried to show the joys of girlhood.
Mhm.
Um,
And you kept your childhood really well, I have
Thank
to
you
say.
so much. I really wanted to because I think, you know, those days we have as girls where we're carefree and confident are so fleeting. They
Right.
sort of disappear once we hit adolescence. So I know readers go through a lot with Ellie and Homa, and I know they can
Mhm.
identify with the friendship, and
Yeah.
so much happens that may be tough, but there's a sense of healing. And that's what I hope they take away from it, this sense of healing and connection, and knowing that even if our friendships don't last, their influence can last. And in a way, they're still a part of us. Those people are a part of us.
I mean, that's what I really loved about this. Not only did I learn about Iran and uh, some history, but I also it was just such a beautiful portrait of a female friendship. I just loved it. And taking in the daughter, and I think most everybody watching this has probably read the book already.
Oh,
So
okay, good. We can talk about things. Yes.
it was just so beautiful. I mean, at the end, like I said, I mean, I was in tears at the end of it. I really thought it was just stunningly beautiful. Really.
Thank you.
Well
Thank you.
done. Did you have I just wonder if you have family members that read it when before you send it to your agent or publisher, did people give you feedback on it?
I learned a long time ago not to really give it to my family members because they love me and they might think something's good when it isn't,
Right.
or they might think something's bad when I gave it to my agent. I worked closely with an editor that my agent works with,
Mm.
and because my own editor at Simon and Schuster had left, and then now the wonderful Hannah Bratton at Simon and Schuster. So it was pretty much
Just you.
our professional team.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing your family members, when it comes out, they must be like, "Wow, this is incredible."
Thank you for saying that. I they do. They also say like, "What's for dinner?" Um, but no, they're very proud, and I'm just I'm tickled when they read it
Yeah.
because it's almost like a little surprise. I don't give it to them too early.
Yeah. So just one last question, which I always ask authors is because the girlfriend is all about female friendship.
Mm,
So I just wondered, I mean, what do you like to do for fun, either
mm.
with friends or girlfriends or just friends in general, or I don't know, loved ones? What do you like to do for fun when you're not writing and reading?
Ooh, I do love to cook.
Oh,
I actually enjoy it, and I think it's very fun and creative. I also like to go out and eat with my girlfriends. I know one of them is watching today. Hi, Cheryl. And, and I love spending time with my friends. I think friendship keeps us afloat and keeps us sane. They're the folks we pick, right?
mhm.
Um, I wish I could tell you more exciting hobbies, but I
No,
don't
cooking
play
is good.
pickleball. Huh? Cooking is
Cooking
good.
is good. Going out to eat is good.
Yes, yes, that's really what I do.
Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's been an honor to interview you. Once again, the book is The Lion Women of Tehran. I think probably everybody, the 100,000 plus members of the book club, have bought the book. But if you haven't, recommend it to your friends and get everybody to read it because it's so, so good. And I just want to say that please stay on the Girlfriend Book Club page because I'm going to be posting 5 or 6 conversation starters so that you guys can talk about what you loved about the book. And I just also have to announce that next month, we'll be joined by Percival Everett, the author of James,
Ooh.
on February the 18th at 7:30 p.m. That's our February book club pick. So we're really excited about that. So everybody have a good evening and stay on the Girlfriend Book Club page for the conversation starters. And thank you again so much. And congratulations on a masterpiece, truly. Thank you.
Aw, thank you so much, Shelley. And I love how we both wore green without planning it.
That's
We
true. I
matched.
didn't even notice that.
Yeah, we matched the book. Thank you so much. This was so
Thank
much
you.
fun.
Thanks. Good night, everybody.